The countdown clock on the wall of the Concorde spire reads 40 seconds, and every eye in the chamber is on me. I am the only human in a room built for 300 delegates, and right now, all 300 of them are deciding whether my species gets to stay among the stars. My name is Ethan Cole. I am not a general, I am not a president. I am a junior attaché who happened to be standing in the gallery when the final session began, and now I am the face my people did not choose to send, but the one who is here anyway. 30 seconds. The delegate from the Halvan cluster will not look at me. Her feathered crest is pressed flat against her skull, the sign of shame among her kind, though I do not think she is ashamed of what she is about to do. I think she is ashamed that she has to look me in the eye while she does it. 20 seconds. A voice crackles through the translation implant behind my ear. It belongs to Director Whitfield, back on Earth, watching this same feed from a command room that smells like burnt coffee and cold nerves. Ethan, she says, whatever happens in that room, you say nothing. You understand me? Nothing. I understand her perfectly. I have understood the plan for 6 months. I just did not think it would feel like this, standing here, watching the machinery of an entire civilization turn against the species that built half of it. 10 seconds. The vote counter above the central dais begins to climb. Green lights for banishment. Red lights for allowing humanity to remain. I watch the numbers rise, delegation after delegation, and I feel something strange settle into my chest. Not fear, not anger. Something closer to relief, the way you feel when a wound you have been dreading finally opens, because at least now you know exactly how deep it goes. The Halvan cluster delegate presses her token, green. The Ordinate Assembly presses theirs, green. Even the Threnian Accord, whose homeworld we pulled out of a dying orbit 11 years ago, presses green, and I watch their ambassador do it without so much as a flicker of hesitation. The final tally locks in place, 284 in favor of banishment, 16 against. Humanity is no longer welcome among the stars we helped map. The chamber falls silent, waiting for me to react. I think some of them expect tears. Some of them, I am certain, expect anger, maybe even a threat, something they can use afterward to justify what they have just done. Instead, I do the one thing none of them prepared for. I smile. It is not a wide smile. It is not smug or cruel. It is small and quiet, and it makes the Halvan delegate's crest twitch in confusion. I let it sit there on my face for exactly as long as it takes the silence to become uncomfortable, and then I speak the only word I am allowed to say. Understood. I turn and walk toward the exit, and the sound of my footsteps on the polished floor is the loudest thing in the room. Nobody stops me. Nobody calls after me. I think, somewhere in the back of their minds, they expected pleading, and pleading they could have answered with something other than silence. What they cannot answer is a species that simply agrees to leave. Outside the chamber, the corridors of the Concorde spire stretch in every direction, lined with banners from every member world, our own long since taken down in anticipation of this exact outcome. I pass a cluster of ordinate technicians who stop talking the moment they see me, their eyes following me the way you watch something dangerous that has, for reasons you do not understand, decided not to be dangerous today. My earpiece crackles again. "Clean exit, Ethan," Whitfield says. "Ships are already moving. Get to the shuttle bay." I do not run, though every instinct tells me to. Running would tell them we are afraid. Running would tell them this decision has broken something in us. So I walk, at an even pace, past delegates who came here today expecting a fight and got a funeral instead, except the corpse is not lying down. It is walking out the front door on its own 2 feet, and that unsettles them far more than any argument I could have made. I reach the shuttle bay 11 minutes later. My craft, a small diplomatic vessel with the false modesty of chipped paint and worn upholstery, sits waiting exactly where it should be. The pilot, a woman named Grace Whitfield's own niece, though nobody outside our circle knows that, nods once as I climb aboard. Ready to go home, Ethan? I strap in and watch the Concorde spire shrink through the viewport, its lights blinking against the dark like a city that does not yet know it is about to lose its brightest neighborhood. Take us out, I tell her. As the shuttle peels away from the docking ring, I think about the last 11 years. I think about the Grinned swarm incursion, when human fleets answered a distress call 3 other species ignored because it was too costly, too dangerous, too far from anyone's border to matter. I think about the Threnian homeworld, its dying orbit stabilized by human engineers who worked 18-hour shifts for 4 months straight, refusing evacuation bonuses because the job was not finished. I think about the trade routes we opened, the diseases we cured, the wars we quietly ended before they could spread past a single system. None of it mattered today, not because it was forgotten, but because it was never truly wanted. We had made ourselves useful, and somewhere along the way, useful had curdled into unsettling. A species that cannot be predicted is a species that cannot be controlled, and a civilization built on careful, managed order has no patience for the unpredictable, no matter how much good that unpredictability produces. The shuttle clears the spire's outer defense perimeter, and for a moment, the comm channel fills with a burst of static, another delegation trying to reach us with some final word, some belated question. I do not answer it. Whitfield's voice returns instead, calm and steady. They are already regretting it, she says. I can hear it in their traffic patterns. But regret does not undo a vote, Ethan. Not yet. Not for a while. I look out at the stars, unfamiliar and endless, and I think about how strange it is to feel this light after being told you are no longer wanted. Perhaps it is because I already knew, in some quiet corner of myself, that we were never meant to stay in that room forever, bowing to rules written by people who feared us more than they respected us. Perhaps it is because I know exactly what is waiting on the other side of that door once we close it. The pilot glances at me, her hands steady on the controls. Where to now? Home, I say. Let's go build something they'll regret losing. She smiles, and the shuttle turns toward the long, dark road back to Seoul, carrying with it the last human delegate to ever sit in that chamber, and the first quiet note of everything that is about to come. Behind us, the Concorde spire keeps turning in its orbit, full of delegates who think they have just solved a problem. They have no idea they have just created one. The stars ahead are silent, patient, waiting to see what a species does when it stops asking for permission to exist among them. I settle back into my seat, close my eyes, and let myself feel, for the first time in months, something close to peace. We are going home, and when we shut that door behind us, we are not planning to open it again anytime soon. 72 hours. That was the number Whitfield gave the full cabinet 6 months before the vote ever happened, and I remember thinking she was insane. Pull every human citizen, every ship, every piece of movable equipment out of foreign space in 72 hours. Nobody does that, not even in war. But Whitfield was never interested in what nobody does. She was interested in what we could do if we stopped explaining ourselves to people who had already made up their minds. By the time my shuttle docks at the lunar staging platform, the operation is already 40 hours old, and it is running like a machine that has been rehearsed 1,000 times, because it has. I step out into a corridor filled with the low hum of cargo lifts and the clipped voices of coordinators speaking into headsets, and for a moment I simply stand there, watching a species pack up 11 years of its life among the stars without a single wasted motion. A young man named Oliver Bennett meets me at the platform gate. He has dark circles under his eyes and a datapad clutched against his chest like a shield. "Ethan Cole," he says, more statement than question. "Director Whitfield wants you in the operations center. She said to tell you the ordnance colony evacuation just hit a snag." "What kind of snag?" "They do not want us to leave," he says, and there is a strange, tired laugh underneath the words. Funny how that works, isn't it? I follow him through the platform, past technicians dismantling communication relays that took years to build, past crates stacked floor to ceiling with equipment we are choosing to leave behind rather than risk a single unnecessary hour in foreign space. I ask Oliver about it, and he shrugs. Director's orders. Anything that isn't ours to keep gets left exactly where it stands. No sabotage, no data wipes, no petty parting gifts. We're not trying to hurt anyone on the way out. We're just leaving. It strikes me, walking past all of it, that this restraint is its own kind of message. A species that is truly bitter about being banished takes things with it, or breaks what it cannot take. We are doing neither. We are simply closing drawers and turning off lights, as if we are guests who overstayed a party and are finally, politely, letting ourselves out. The operations center is a wide room lined with screens, each one tracking a different sector of withdrawal. Whitfield stands at the center of it, sleeves rolled up, hair pulled back, looking like she has not slept in 2 days, because she has not. "Ethan," she says without turning around. "Good. You're here. Look at Sector 9. I look. Sector 9 shows the ordnate colony of Farron's Hollow, a mining settlement built jointly by human engineers and ordnate laborers over the course of 6 years. The screen shows a crowd gathered around the human transport ships, not to stop them, but to stand in front of them, arms linked, refusing to move. They are asking us to stay, Whitfield says, not the ordnate government. The workers, the people who actually live there. I feel something tighten in my chest. Can we stay? No, she says, and there is real regret in her voice, the first crack of emotion I have seen from her all day. The Assembly's ruling applies to every human citizen in foreign territory, without exception. If we leave anyone behind, even at their own request, it hands the Assembly grounds to escalate the ruling into something far worse than banishment. We cannot give them that opening. So what do? Watch, she says, and listen. Grace Whitfield is planet-side handling it personally. The screen shifts to show a woman standing at the base of the ramp, facing the crowd. This is not the pilot who flew my shuttle. This is her aunt, the Grace Whitfield the operation is truly built around, the one whose name sits quietly behind half the decisions made over the last decade. She raises her hands, not in surrender, but in a gesture, asking for quiet, and the crowd slowly stills. I know what you're asking, she says, her voice carrying clearly through the platform's audio feed, and I wish I could give it to you. But if we stay, we hand them a reason to come after everyone else who has ever worked beside a human. We won't do that. Not to you. Not to anyone. An older ordnate man steps forward from the crowd, his voice raw. Then what happens to everything we built together? The water reclamation systems. The medical station. Who runs it when you're gone? You do, Grace says simply. We taught you how. That was always the plan, even if none of us wanted it to happen this fast. The crowd does not part easily, but it parts. One by one, hands unlink, and a path opens toward the ships. I watch Grace walk down the line, stopping to clasp hands with workers she has known for years, saying names, not slogans, until the last ship's ramp begins to rise. Whitfield beside me exhales slowly. That is happening in 41 systems right now, she says. Different words, same story. We built things worth missing. Now we are proving we can leave them standing. The next hours blur into a rhythm of departures. I watch a supply convoy leave the Threnian system, waved off by engineers who worked alongside us on their planet's stabilization project, several of them openly weeping, not from anger, but from something closer to grief. I watch a diplomatic office on a distant trade hub close its doors for the last time, its human staff shaking hands with local clerks who have shared lunch with them nearly every day for 3 years. Not every departure is peaceful. On one screen, a group calling itself the Concorde's True Voice attempts to block a human transport near a shipping lane, shouting that our presence has always been a threat and good riddance to the danger. Whitfield watches the feed without flinching. Let them shout, she says. Anger fades. What people remember is how we behaved when they finally got what they voted for. By hour 50, most of the outer systems report complete withdrawal. What remains is the heart of it, the embassies and joint research stations closest to the Concord's central worlds, the places where humanity's influence runs deepest, and where, I suspect, the goodbye will hurt the most. Oliver finds me again near hour 58, this time looking somehow more exhausted and more awake at once. "You should see Sector 2, he says. "It's the Halvan cluster. Something's happening there you'll want to witness yourself." I follow him to a private viewing terminal. The Halvan cluster was, until 3 days ago, home to humanity's largest cultural exchange program, a decade-long effort to share art, language, and history between our two species. The feed shows the exchange hall, its walls lined with murals painted by human and Halvan artists working side by side, now standing empty except for a single figure. It is the same delegate who could not look at me during the vote, her feathered crest no longer pressed flat in shame, but standing rigid, almost defiant, as she watches the last human curator lock the hall's doors. The curator, a soft-spoken woman I recognize from old briefing photos, turns and offers the delegate a small, sad smile. "The murals stay," she says. "They were never ours alone to take." The delegate says nothing for a long moment, then finally speaks, her voice raw through the translation feed. "We did not think you would actually leave." "I know," the curator says. That was rather the point of the vote, wasn't it? She walks away without waiting for an answer, and the delegate remains standing alone in the empty hall, staring up at murals that no longer have anyone left to explain their meaning. By hour 68, the operations center falls into something unfamiliar after 3 days of controlled chaos. Quiet. Whitfield walks slowly along the row of screens, each one now showing empty docking bays, closed embassies, silent trade stations. She stops in front of the final display, a live feed from the very last human vessel still inside Concord territory, currently completing its departure from the central trade hub that once served as the beating heart of interspecies commerce. "This is it," she says. "Last ship out." The feed shows the vessel's captain, a broad-shouldered man named Nathan Price, standing at the viewport as the station's lights shrink behind him. A voice crackles over the comm from station traffic control, one of the few Concord officials still willing to speak to a departing human ship. "Safe travels, Captain," the voice says. Oddly formal, oddly final. "For what it's worth, some of us are not glad to see you go." Nathan does not answer right away. When he finally does, his voice is calm, almost gentle. "Then maybe you should have voted differently," he says. "Take care of yourselves out here." The comm goes silent. The station shrinks to a point of light, and then disappears entirely from the feed as Nathan's ship makes its final jump toward home. Whitfield stands very still, watching the empty screen for a long moment before turning to the room. 71 hours, 52 minutes, she says. Every human citizen accounted for, every asset either retrieved or left intact. 0 incidents of retaliation on our part. Get some rest, all of you. You earned it. The room erupts into something between exhausted applause and stunned silence, the sound of people realizing they just accomplished something they were not entirely sure was possible. I find myself standing near the window, looking out at the pale curve of earth below, and I think about Grace Whitfield walking down that line of workers, about the curator locking a door on murals that would outlive the argument that separated us from them, about Nathan Price's quiet, unshaken voice as the last light of Concord space vanished behind him. We did not slam the door. We did not need to. We simply closed it, gently, deliberately, and let the silence on the other side speak for itself. Behind me, Oliver sets his datapad down for the first time in 3 days and lets out a long breath. "So," he says. "What now?" I turn back toward the window, toward the blue and green world turning quietly beneath us. carrying every single one of its people home for the first time in over a decade. Now, I say, we find out what we can build when nobody outside that door gets a vote on it. 6 months of silence changes a galaxy faster than 6 years of war. I learned this not from a briefing room on Earth, but from a small, encrypted relay station hidden inside an asteroid field just beyond what used to be Concord-monitored space. Officially, the station does not exist. Unofficially, it is where a handful of us sit and watch, quietly, as the civilization that voted us out begins to come apart at the seams it never knew we were holding together. My job here is simple. I listen, I translate, I report. Director Whitfield does not call it spying, and technically she is right, since we are not stealing anything, only receiving the flood of open distress calls, panicked trade broadcasts, and desperate diplomatic pleas that the Concord worlds are now sending out into a void that used to answer them within minutes. Nobody answers anymore, not the way we used to. I am on shift when the first major signal comes through. A garbled transmission from the mining outpost at Farron's Hollow, the same colony where Grace Whitfield once walked down a line of grieving workers on her way out the door. The message is short, panicked, and directed at nobody in particular, because there is nobody left listening who can help. Water reclamation system failure, the voice says, cracking with static and something close to fear. Requesting technical assistance. Repeat. Requesting technical assistance. We do not have anyone left who can repair the secondary filtration array. I sit with my hand hovering over the comm switch for a long moment. Before I remember, I am not allowed to answer. Whitfield's orders are clear. We watch. We do not intervene. Not yet, not until the moment is right, because a single act of unsanctioned aid could be twisted by the Assembly into proof that humanity never truly left, that we are still meddling in affairs no longer ours to touch. I let the transmission fade into silence, and I hate how much it costs me to do it. The reports pile up over the following weeks, like snow before an avalanche. A shipping lane collapse near the ordinate homeworld, caused by a debris field human patrol ships used to clear on a rotating schedule nobody else ever noticed or thanked us for. A medical crisis on a border colony where the only doctor trained in a rare treatment protocol happened to be human and left with everyone else during the withdrawal. A trade dispute between 2 minor systems that spirals into an armed standoff within days because the human-brokered arbitration council that used to mediate exactly this kind of disagreement no longer exists to step in. None of it is catastrophic on its own. That is what makes it worse. It is 1,000 small failures, each one manageable, in isolation, each one impossible to fix quickly because the quiet infrastructure of expertise and goodwill that used to catch these problems before they became crises simply is not there anymore. Then the Grinned swarm returns. I am asleep in the narrow bunk at the back of the relay station when Oliver Bennett shakes me awake, his face pale in the low light. "You need to see this," he says, "right now." The main screen shows a live feed pulled from a damaged ordinate sensor array near the edge of what used to be contested space. Dozens of ships, sleek and dark and utterly without markings, are moving in a slow, deliberate formation toward the outer colonies. I recognize the pattern immediately, even after all these years. It is the same staging maneuver the Grinned used 11 years ago, before the swarm tore through 3 systems and reached the edge of the Threnian homeworld. The one human fleet stopped cold in a battle that cost us more than any Concord history book will ever properly credit. They are testing the border, I say quietly, seeing who answers. Nobody is answering, Oliver says. I've been monitoring Concord military channels for the last hour. Their response fleet is scrambling, but it's disorganized. They lost their unified command structure when the Joint Task Force dissolved after the vote. Half their captains do not even have updated Grinned engagement protocols. We wrote those protocols, Ethan. We wrote most of them. I stare at the screen, at ships full of people who voted to send us away, now scrambling to fight a threat we used to handle as a matter of routine, and I feel a strange, uncomfortable mixture of vindication and something closer to grief. I did not want this. None of us wanted this. We wanted to be respected, not needed out of desperation. Get Whitfield on the line, I say. She needs to see this now. Whitfield's face appears on a secondary screen within minutes, and even through the grainy connection, I can see the tension in her jaw as she watches the same feed we are watching. This is exactly what the Grinned do, she says. They wait. They watch for weakness. And right now, the entire Concord looks like an animal with a limb missing, still trying to walk like nothing happened. Are we intervening? Oliver asks. Not yet, Whitfield says, and I can hear the weight behind those two words. Not until it is our choice to make, not theirs. If we run in now, we prove every fear that pushed them toward that vote in the first place, that we cannot be trusted to respect a boundary once it's drawn. We wait, we watch, we let them handle their own crisis, and if it becomes something larger, something that threatens more than pride, then we decide, on our own terms, whether we want to help. I want to argue with her. Some part of me, the part that spent years training alongside ordinate cadets and eating dinner with Threnian engineers, wants to fly out there myself and do something, anything, rather than sit in the dark and watch people I once called colleagues struggle against a threat we know better than anyone alive. But I understand the deeper truth beneath her order. If we save them the moment things get hard, we teach them nothing except that banishing us costs nothing, because we will always come running regardless. If that lesson sticks, this entire 6 months of restraint means nothing. So we watch. Over the following days, I intercept transmission after transmission, painting a picture of a civilization straining under pressure it has not felt in over a decade. Ordinate Command loses 2 outer colonies to Grinned raiding parties within the first week, an outcome that would have been unthinkable when human border patrols still ran their old rotating perimeter sweeps. The Threnian Accord, whose homeworld we once saved from a dying orbit, sends increasingly desperate requests for military coordination to allies who no longer have the shared protocols or joint command structure to respond effectively. I begin to hear a name repeated across multiple channels, spoken with a mixture of frustration and reluctant hope. Delegate Marin Ashcombe, junior representative of the Halvin cluster, the same delegate who once refused to look me in the eye during the vote, now apparently one of the loudest voices in the assembly, arguing for a formal reassessment of the banishment ruling. I find a recording of one of her speeches buried in a leaked assembly transcript that Oliver manages to pull from an old diplomatic archive, still linked to a relay we somehow forgot to fully disconnect. Her voice sounds different from the cold, formal tone I remember from the vote, rawer now, edged with something close to desperation. We told ourselves we were choosing stability, she says to a chamber that sounds far emptier and far more restless than the one I stood in 6 months ago. We told ourselves humanity's presence was the danger. But look at what has happened since they left. Look at how quickly the structures we took for granted collapsed the moment the hands holding them up were gone. I am not saying we were wrong to fear what we did not understand. I am saying we never stopped to ask whether what we feared was actually the thing keeping us safe. The recording ends there, cut off by static, but it is enough. I sit back from the console and let out a breath I did not realize I was holding. They know, I say to Oliver. Some of them already know they made a mistake. Knowing and admitting it publicly are different things, Oliver says. And admitting it is different again from actually asking us back on terms we would ever agree to. He is right, and I know it, but there is something satisfying in a quiet and complicated way about hearing an admission of failure from the same chamber that once decided our worth in a matter of minutes. Back on Earth, the story is a different one entirely, and Whitfield makes sure I see it during my next scheduled leave from the relay station. I return home to find a planet that has spent the last 6 months not licking its wounds, but building. New shipyards rise along the lunar surface, staffed by engineers who no longer split their attention between domestic projects and endless diplomatic obligations to a dozen Concord worlds. Research divisions, once forced to share resources and priorities with joint Concord science boards, now move at a pace that leaves even seasoned scientists, like Grace Whitfield's niece, slightly breathless. I walk through one of the new orbital shipyards with Grace herself, the same woman who once faced down a crowd of grieving ordinate workers on her way out of Farron's Hollow. She looks lighter now, somehow, despite the exhaustion still visible around her eyes. "You would not believe how much faster everything moves," she tells me, gesturing at a half-completed vessel taking shape in the dock beside us, its hull lines sharper and more efficient than anything I remember from before the banishment. We spent so many years designing around compromise, trying to fit our technology into frameworks built to keep the Concorde comfortable. Turns out, when nobody outside is telling you how fast or how far you are allowed to go, you go a great deal further. I ask her whether she ever regrets any part of the withdrawal, whether some quiet part of her wishes we had fought harder to stay. She considers the question seriously before answering. "I regret that people got hurt because of decisions made by delegates who never had to live with the consequences," she says. "I do not regret leaving. We spent 11 years bending ourselves smaller to fit into a shape that made everyone else comfortable. I do not think I realized how much smaller we had made ourselves until I watched us stop." That night, back at the relay station, I receive a message flagged with the highest priority code Whitfield's office uses, reserved for developments that change the entire shape of our strategy. I open it to find a short, simple line of text. "Grinned swarm has broken through the outer Threnian defense perimeter. Concord Assembly requesting emergency contact with Earth. First formal communication since the vote. Stand by for further instructions." I read the message twice, feeling the weight of it settle slowly into my chest. 6 months ago, an entire chamber of delegates looked at humanity and decided we were the danger worth removing. Now, with the very threat we once held at bay pressing against their borders again, they are finally asking, for the first time since that vote, whether they were wrong. I do not feel triumphant reading it. I feel something quieter and somehow heavier, the recognition that we are standing at the edge of a decision far more difficult than the one that sent us away in the first place. Do we answer? Do we let them struggle a while longer, until the lesson is truly learned? Do we risk everything we have rebuilt in 6 short months by opening a door we swore we would not touch again? I set the message down and stare out through the narrow viewport at the dark field of asteroids surrounding the station, and somewhere beyond them, past the silence, an entire civilization is waiting to see what we do next. For the first time since the vote was cast, the choice, fully and completely, belongs to us. Whitfield chooses me to meet them, and I do not fully understand why until I am standing at the edge of Sol's outer defense perimeter, watching a single, unarmed Concorde shuttle approach through a wall of silent human warships. "You were in the room when they voted," she tells me the night before, as we review the arrangements one final time in a quiet briefing room lit only by the glow of a star map. "You watched them do it without flinching. I want them to look at the same face across the table now and understand nothing has changed in how we carry ourselves. Not our confidence, not our patience, nothing." I ask her if she is worried about how this will go. "I am worried about how it goes if we let them think desperation earns them anything," she says. "That is the only thing I am worried about." The morning of the meeting, I stand aboard a modest human vessel positioned exactly at the boundary line the assembly itself drew 6 months ago. The invisible border past which no Concorde ship was meant to cross again without express permission. Behind me, arranged in a formation too precise to read as anything but deliberate, sits a fraction of the fleet Grace Whitfield's shipyards have built since the withdrawal. Sleek, dark, unmarked by the diplomatic insignia we once wore like a badge of good behavior. I am told there are 3 times as many ships waiting further back, out of sensor range, simply because Whitfield wanted the visible ones to look calm rather than desperate. The Concorde shuttle drifts closer, running lights dimmed in what I assume is meant to read as a gesture of humility. When it finally docks, the airlock cycles open, and I recognize the woman who steps through immediately, though 6 months have changed her more than I expected. Delegate Maren Ashcombe no longer wears the formal robes of the Halvan Cluster's official envoy. Her crest, once pressed flat in shame during the vote, now sits in a strange, restless position I do not have a translation for, something between exhaustion and resolve. She is flanked by 2 aides who look barely old enough to hold their positions, both of them staring at the human warships lining our side of the border with poorly concealed unease. "Ambassador Cole," she says, and the formal title surprises me. I was not an ambassador 6 months ago. I was barely a witness. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I did not agree to anything, I tell her, keeping my voice even. I was sent to listen. Whether this becomes a meeting depends entirely on what you say next. She studies me for a long moment, and I watch something flicker behind her eyes, a recalculation of whatever speech she prepared on the journey here. "Fair enough," she says finally. "May we sit?" I lead them into the small conference chamber, prepared for this exact purpose, its walls bare except for a single star chart and a viewport looking out onto the dark line of ships beyond. No refreshments, no pleasantries displayed on the walls. Whitfield was specific about that detail. This is not a negotiation between friends catching up after a long separation. This is a formal audience, and every inch of the room's silence is meant to say so. Maren sits across from me, folding her hands carefully on the table, and begins without further preamble. "The Grinned swarm has taken 2 colonies in the outer Threnian systems," she says. "Casualties are still being counted. Estimates place the number in the low thousands, with tens of thousands more displaced. Our joint fleets have managed to hold a defensive line for the past 11 days, but our command structure was never rebuilt to function without the coordination protocols your forces used to provide. We are losing ground, Ambassador, slowly but steadily." I let the silence stretch before answering, the way I once let it stretch in the Concorde chamber 6 months ago, and I watch it unsettle her the same way it unsettled everyone else that day. "I am sorry for the lives lost," I say finally, and I mean it fully, without reservation. That grief is real, and I will not pretend otherwise. But I am not sure why you are telling me this instead of your own Emergency Defense Council. "Because we are formally requesting Earth's reinstatement into the Concorde," she says, the words coming out fast now, like she has rehearsed them 100 times and is afraid of losing her nerve halfway through. "Full diplomatic standing, full military cooperation, immediate joint deployment against the Grinned threat. The Assembly voted 3 days ago to authorize this request. It was not unanimous. It was not even close to unanimous. But it passed." I study her carefully, watching for the parts of the offer she has not yet said aloud, the conditions I know must be buried somewhere beneath the desperation. "What terms?" I ask. "What does reinstatement actually look like, in your Assembly's language?" She hesitates, and that hesitation tells me everything before she even speaks. "The original Accord framework, restored largely as it stood before the vote," she says, "with minor revisions to address the concerns that led to the original ruling." I lean back slightly, and I let a small, humorless laugh escape before I can stop it. "So, the same framework that let 284 delegates decide our entire species was too dangerous to keep around, restored with minor revisions," I say. "Delegate Ashcombe, do you understand how that sounds from where I am sitting?" Her jaw tightens, but she does not look away. "I understand it is not enough," she says. "I argued that point myself in the Assembly chamber more than once, and lost that argument more than once. But the alternative you are offering us is silence, and silence is currently costing us thousands of lives a week." "The alternative we are offering," I say carefully, "is a choice. Your choice, not ours. 6 months ago, Your assembly made a choice about us without ever once asking what we needed or wanted from that relationship. You decided unilaterally that our presence was too costly to keep, despite everything we built alongside you. I am not interested in returning to a framework built entirely around your comfort, especially not one offered to us only because comfort has run out. One of her aides shifts uncomfortably beside her, but Marin holds perfectly still, absorbing the words without flinching. "Then tell me what you are interested in," she says quietly. "Because I did not come here to defend a vote I never wanted cast. I came here because I believe there is still something worth saving between our peoples, and I am asking you, honestly, what that would require." For the first time since she sat down, I believe her. I let the silence stretch once more, not as a weapon this time, but because I am genuinely considering how to answer honestly. "It would require starting from nothing," I say finally. "No restored framework. No revised version of an agreement that was broken the moment your assembly decided our worth could be settled by a majority vote. If there is a future between us, it gets built new, from the ground, on equal footing, with protections that cannot simply be voted away the next time we make someone uncomfortable." "Equal footing," she repeats slowly, as if testing the shape of the words. "The Concord has never negotiated with any species on those terms. Every member world entered under the existing framework, accepting its structure as a condition of membership. Then perhaps it is time the framework changed for everyone," I say, "not just for us." She is quiet for a long moment, staring down at her folded hands, and when she looks back up, something has shifted in her expression, something that looks almost like relief mixed with dread. "And the Grinned swarm," she says. "What happens to the Threnian colonies while our two peoples spend months, maybe years, negotiating an entirely new framework from nothing?" This is the question I have been waiting for, the one Whitfield prepared me most carefully to answer. "We are not withholding help out of cruelty," I tell her. "Humanity is prepared to offer immediate, direct military support to the Threnian defense line, effective within 48 hours of a formal request, separate entirely from any question of Concord reinstatement. That offer is not conditional on your assembly rejoining terms with us. It is conditional only on the Threnian Accord itself requesting it, government to government, outside the Concord's collective authority." Marin's eyes widen slightly, the first genuine surprise I have seen from her since she boarded this ship. "You would help them," she says slowly, "without demanding anything from the assembly in return?" "We would help people who are dying," I say. "That was never in question. What is in question is whether your assembly gets to keep treating our help as something it can vote in and out of existence whenever it becomes politically convenient. The Threnian Accord can reach out to us directly, today, and receive an answer within the hour. The rest of the Concord can decide, on its own timeline, whether it wants a genuine partnership or simply continued access to a convenient safety net it can discard the moment we become inconvenient again." She sits back slowly, and for the first time since she walked through that airlock, I see something close to admiration cross her face, tangled up with the exhaustion and grief she has clearly been carrying since this crisis began. "That is not the answer I expected," she admits. "What did you expect?" "Anger," she says simply. "Or worse, gloating. I prepared myself for both. I did not prepare myself for an offer this fair, aimed directly around the people responsible for the vote in the first place. We are not interested in punishing the people caught in the middle of decisions they did not make," I say. "We are interested in making sure the people who did make that decision understand it cannot simply be undone with an apology and an emergency request, not without real change behind it." She nods slowly, absorbing the weight of everything I have said, and for a long moment neither of us speaks, the silence in the room settling into something almost peaceful compared to the tension that opened this meeting. "I will carry this back to the assembly," she says finally. "I do not know how they will respond. Some will call it an insult. Some, I suspect, will finally understand it as the only honest offer humanity could make after what we did." I stand, signaling the meeting's end, and she rises with me, her two aides following close behind, both of them looking considerably less tense than when they arrived. "One more thing, Ambassador Cole," she says, pausing at the chamber door. "For whatever it is worth, I voted against the banishment. It did not matter in the end, but I wanted you to know that." "I remember," I say quietly. "I watched every vote that day, Delegate Ashcombe. I know exactly who stood where." She holds my gaze a moment longer, something unspoken passing between us, and then she turns and walks back through the airlock toward her waiting shuttle, carrying with her an offer far more complicated and far more honest than the one she arrived with. I watch her ship pull away from the docking ring and begin its slow retreat back across the boundary line, back toward a Concorde still bleeding from a wound of its own making, and I think about how strange it is that the same silence I once used to unsettle an entire chamber has become, today, the closest thing to hope either of our species has offered the other in 6 long months. Behind me, my comm crackles quietly to life, Whitfield's voice steady and calm. "Well done, Ethan," she says. "Now we wait and see whether they actually mean it." The Threnian Accord's request arrives within 6 hours of Marin Ashcombe's shuttle crossing back over the boundary line, and it does not come through the Concorde's usual diplomatic channels. It comes as a direct, unencrypted transmission addressed to Earth alone, signed by the Threnian Planetary Council, bypassing the Assembly entirely. "We are asking you as the people who once saved our world, not as members of a body that failed to protect what we built together," the message reads. "Please come." Whitfield authorizes the deployment within the hour, and I am given a choice I did not expect. She asks if I want to go with the relief fleet, not as a diplomat this time, but simply as a witness, the same role I played in that Concorde chamber 8 months ago when this entire story began. I say yes before she finishes the question. The journey to the Threnian front line takes 11 days, and I spend most of it in the observation deck of a support vessel named after a river back on Earth, watching the crew prepare with a quiet, practiced efficiency that still catches me off guard even now. These are not soldiers fighting a war of conquest. They are engineers, medics, and pilots, most of them younger than me, moving with the calm certainty of people who trained for exactly this moment during 6 months when the rest of the galaxy assumed we were simply hiding, licensing our wounds, learning nothing. We were not hiding, we were building. When we arrive at the edge of Threnian space, the scale of the damage becomes real in a way no transmission could have prepared me for. 2 colonies reduced to debris fields. A third holding on by the barest margin, its remaining defense fleet stretched thin across a perimeter far too wide for the ships left to guard it. Grinned swarm vessels move through the wreckage in slow, patient formations, the same unmarked, featureless ships I watched approach on a relay screen months ago, back when this was still someone else's problem. It is not someone else's problem anymore. It never fully was. The human fleet moves into position with a coordination that makes the exhausted Threnian commander on the shared comm channel go quiet for several long seconds before he finally speaks. "I forgot," he says softly, almost to himself. "I forgot what it looked like when your ships moved like this." The engagement itself unfolds over the better part of 2 days, and I will not pretend it is simple or bloodless, because it is neither. But I watch a defense line that was buckling for 11 days stabilize within hours of human reinforcement arriving, watch coordinated maneuvers that the Concorde's fractured command structure could not manage on its own snap back into place with a precision built from years of shared protocol that never fully left our training even after the withdrawal. By the 3rd day, the Grinned swarm withdraws from Threnian space entirely, retreating back toward whatever dark corner of the galaxy it came from, at least for now. The colony that stood on the edge of collapse remains standing, battered but intact, its people alive because a request reached us directly, honestly, without the weight of an assembly vote attached to it. I stand on the observation deck as the last Grinned signature fades from our sensors, and I feel none of the triumph I expected, only a quiet, tired relief. The same feeling I imagine every person on this ship is carrying right now. The simple satisfaction of having helped because helping was the right thing to do, not because a vote demanded it or forbade it. The Threnian Planetary Council requests a formal meeting 3 weeks later, once the immediate crisis has stabilized enough to allow for careful conversation rather than desperate triage. This time, Whitfield attends in person, and I stand beside her, no longer simply a witness, but something closer to a full participant in whatever comes next. The meeting takes place on Threnian soil, in a modest council chamber built from the same pale stone I remember from photographs of the original stabilization project 11 years ago, back when this partnership was young and uncomplicated. The council members who greet us are not the same delegates who voted for banishment. Threnian representation in the Concord Assembly has changed considerably since the crisis began, and I recognize the shift immediately in the way they speak, careful and direct, without the practiced diplomatic distance the old delegates always maintained. We do not want to simply rejoin the framework we shared before, the council's senior representative tells Whitfield, an older woman named Elira Vantris, whose steady voice carries the particular calm of someone who has already lived through the worst outcome and found her footing on the other side of it. We want something built new, exactly as your ambassador proposed to delegate Ashcombe. Equal standing, protections that cannot be stripped away by a majority vote whenever fear outweighs gratitude. We are prepared to be the first Concord world to formally propose such an agreement, separate entirely from the larger Assembly's timeline. Whitfield studies her for a long moment before answering, and I recognize the particular stillness in her posture, the same careful weighing of words I watched her practice for months before that first vote ever took place. We are prepared to discuss that seriously, she says. But I want to be clear about something first. This is not humanity returning to the Concord. This is Earth entering into a direct partnership with the Threnian Accord, built on our own terms, negotiated as equals. What the rest of the Assembly chooses to do with that example is entirely up to them. Elira nods slowly, something like respect settling into her expression. That is precisely what we are asking for, she says. The negotiations that follow take the better part of 4 months, and I am present for nearly all of them, watching a new kind of agreement take shape from the ground up, one built without the quiet condescension baked into the old Concord framework, without the assumption that humanity's usefulness entitled the rest of the galaxy to unilateral authority over our fate. It is slower than the old system. It is more careful, more deliberate, built with the hard-won understanding that trust, once broken, does not simply reset itself because the need for help has returned. Word of the Threnian agreement spreads through the wider Concord faster than any of us expected, and within another 6 months, 3 more member worlds approach Earth directly, bypassing the Assembly entirely, each requesting the same kind of equal, direct partnership rather than a return to the old collective framework. The Assembly itself sends periodic requests for reconsideration, each one a little more humble than the last, each one still asking, in careful diplomatic language, for humanity to return to a structure built around everyone else's comfort. Whitfield answers each request the same way, patiently, without malice, without gloating. The door is not locked, she tells the Assembly's latest envoy during a brief exchange I witness from the edge of the room. It was never locked, but we will not walk back through it simply because you are finally uncomfortable with what happened after we left. If the Assembly wants a genuine relationship with Earth, it can start exactly where the Threnian Accord started, on equal footing, built new. The envoy leaves with no promises, only the same quiet, unsettled expression I remember from the delegates who watched me walk out of that chamber so many months ago. A year after the vote that sent us away, I find myself standing once again in an observation gallery, though this one belongs to a station built entirely by human hands, orbiting a newly established joint colony shared between Earth and the Threnian Accord, the first physical proof of the new kind of partnership we fought to define. Grace Whitfield stands beside me, no longer wearing the exhausted expression she carried during the withdrawal, her posture relaxed in a way I have not seen since long before the vote ever took place. "Strange, isn't it?" she says, looking out at the colony lights spreading slowly across the dark curve of a world that did not exist on any map a year ago. A year ago, they told us we did not belong among the stars. I watched the lights below, thinking about the empty chamber I walked out of, about Grace's own niece flying that first shuttle home, about Nathan Price's calm voice as the last Concorde station vanished behind him, about Marin Ashcombe's quiet admission at the chamber door, about the 11 days it took to reach a dying colony that no vote could have saved in time. We never needed their permission to belong here, I say finally. We just needed to stop asking for it. Grace smiles, the first truly easy smile I have seen from her in over a year, and together we watch the new colony's lights blink steadily against the dark, built not on anyone else's terms, not out of fear or desperation, but on the simple, hard-earned foundation of two peoples choosing each other honestly, for the first time. Behind us, Earth continues to grow stronger with every passing month, self-sufficient in ways it never fully was during all those years spent bending itself smaller to fit inside someone else's comfortable framework. Ahead of us, a slow, careful trickle of new partnerships continues to form, each one built the same deliberate way, each one a quiet answer to the question the Concorde Assembly asked, without ever truly considering the consequences. They wondered what would happen if they voted humanity out of the stars. We showed them. Not with anger, not with force, simply by proving, patiently and completely, that we never needed their chamber, their votes, or their permission to become exactly who we were always capable of being. The door remained standing where we left it, closed but never locked, waiting quietly for anyone honest enough to knock the right way. And for the first time since that final tally lit up the board in the Concorde spire, I finally understand what Whitfield meant all those months ago when she told me that walking away was never the ending. It was only ever the beginning.